still just a nurse?" my sister asked, smirking across the dinner table as though she had already won. The family laughed. I said nothing. Then the restaurant doors opened. The governor walked straight toward me, took my hand, and said, "Thank you, Doctor. You saved my life." My sister's smile disappeared. But what she asked me to do the following morning revealed why she had spent years pretending not to know who I was. My name is Rachel Monroe. I am 41 years old. By the time Governor James Holloway entered that restaurant, I had already spent 13 hours coordinating emergency response after a highway collision involving 7 vehicles, 2 trapped passengers, and a school bus carrying 12 children. I had changed out of my blood-stained trauma jacket before leaving the hospital, but the marks from my protective mask were still visible across my face. I wore a plain black blouse, dark trousers, and the small metal medical flashlight Dr. 18 Ellis had given me during residency clipped inside my coat pocket. I had almost skipped the dinner. It was being held to celebrate Melissa's appointment as president of the Monroe Health Foundation, to a local charity our parents had helped establish. My mother had called 3 times that week to remind me that Melissa's new position was important for the family. She did not ask whether I was on call. She did not ask whether I could leave the emergency department. She simply told me that arriving late would look unsupportive. I reached the restaurant 27 minutes after dinner began. Melissa sat at the center of the table in a cream-colored dress, surrounded by relatives, donors, and 2 members of the foundation board. She had arranged the seating so every photograph placed her between our parents. The empty chair reserved for me was near the end, beside the service station. That detail would have bothered me when I was younger. At 41, it only confirmed that some family habits survived because no one saw a reason to change them. My mother looked at my clothes and frowned. "You could have changed at the hospital." "I did," I said. Melissa lifted her glass. "Into what, another uniform?" A few people smiled before she delivered the line she had clearly been waiting to use. "Still just a nurse." The laughter was not loud at first. It moved around the table in small bursts. Encouraged by Melissa's expression, my uncle asked whether I still worked night shifts. One of the donors said nursing was honorable work. My father nodded as though someone had offered consolation. No one asked why I had arrived directly from the hospital or why the governor's security detail was visible through the restaurant windows. Melissa knew I was a physician. She had known for years. She had seen my name in articles, hospital announcements, and emergency preparedness briefings. She had once forwarded a profile about me to our mother with the message, "Rachel always makes these roles sound more important than they are." Calling me a nurse was not confusion. It was maintenance. Melissa had spent most of our lives protecting a family arrangement in which she was the impressive daughter and I was the useful one. Her mistakes needed rescue. My achievements needed reduction. If I missed a holiday because I was treating trauma patients, I was distant. If Melissa missed one because she was overwhelmed, she was under pressure. My parents did not create that pattern alone, but they had protected it so consistently that it eventually felt like tradition. I kept quiet because correcting her in front of donors would have turned the evening into another story about my inability to let Melissa have one moment. Then the restaurant doors opened. Governor Holloway entered with 2 members of his security team and the hospital's public affairs director. He had recovered well since the motorcade accident the previous year, but I still noticed the stiffness in his left side when he walked. He ignored the foundation board members who stood to greet him and came directly to me. He took my hand in both of his and said, "Thank you, Doctor. You saved my life." My mother's face changed first. My father slowly placed his glass on the table. Melissa stared at our hands as though the governor had violated an agreement. She believed everyone understood. He told the room that I had led the trauma response after his vehicle was struck, recognized internal bleeding before it became fatal, and kept him alive long enough for surgery. I asked him how his rehabilitation was progressing. He said, "Well," then thanked me again before joining the hospital director at another table. When I sat down, no one laughed. Melissa recovered before the others. "Rachel never tells us anything," she said, forcing a smile. I looked at her. No one asked. That should have ended the evening. Instead, it began something else. Before I left, Melissa touched my arm and asked whether I still had direct access to the governor. Her voice was casual, but her grip was not. I told her I did not use former patients for personal favors. She smiled again and said she was only curious. The next morning, I woke to 9 missed calls from my mother, 4 from my father, and a message from Melissa marked urgent. By then, state auditors had begun reviewing the foundation she had just been appointed to lead. And the sister who had spent years calling me just a nurse suddenly needed the full weight of my name. Melissa had been the protected child in our family long before anyone used the word favorite. She was 4 years older than me, more charming, more expressive, and naturally skilled at making adults feel appreciated. When she entered a room, she noticed who needed a compliment and who wanted to be included. My parents called that warmth. When I stayed quiet and watched before speaking, they called it distance. By the time we were teenagers, the roles had settled into place. Melissa was the daughter who needed encouragement. I was the daughter who could handle disappointment. Her mistakes were treated like emergencies. Mine were treated like evidence that I should have known better. When Melissa failed a class, my father met with the teacher and argued that the grading had been unfair. When I earned the highest score in the same school 2 years later, he told me not to become arrogant. When Melissa damaged her first car, my parents replaced it because losing transportation would isolate her from her friends. When I asked for help buying used textbooks, my mother suggested I work more hours. None of those moments seemed large enough to name on their own. Together, they created a family structure in which Melissa's comfort was protected and my resilience was assumed. The clearest example came when I was 18. I had been accepted into a competitive pre-medical program and received partial financial aid. The remaining tuition was more than I could afford. But my parents had spent years telling me there was a college account in my name. I brought the acceptance letter to the kitchen table, expecting the first real celebration of my life. My mother read the first paragraph and smiled. My father asked when payment was due. Then both of them became quiet. Melissa had caused an accident 6 weeks earlier after leaving a party. She struck a parked vehicle, damaged a storefront, and failed a roadside sobriety test. No one had told me the full story. I knew only that she had been under stress and that the family was handling it privately. My parents used the money from my college account to pay for an attorney, repairs, medical expenses for the injured passenger in Melissa's car, and a settlement that kept the case from becoming public. I asked why they had not spoken to me before taking it. My father said there had been no time. My mother said Melissa's future could have been destroyed. I looked at the acceptance letter lying between us and asked, "What about mine?" My father leaned back in his chair. "You are stronger than she is." The words were meant to sound like faith in me. They felt like a sentence. Melissa stood in the doorway during that conversation. She knew exactly where the money had come from. She did not apologize. She said only, "I never asked them to do that." It was technically true and emotionally dishonest. She had not needed to ask. Everyone in the house already understood that protecting her was the default. That night, I applied for work at a pharmacy, a nursing home, and a 24-hour grocery store. By the following month, I was working evening shifts filling shelves and weekend mornings, assisting residents with meals. I studied during bus rides and kept flashcards inside my apron pocket. Some nights, I arrived home after midnight and found Melissa asleep on the sofa beneath a blanket my mother had brought her. She had been sent to a coastal wellness retreat for 2 weeks because the accident had been traumatic for her. I was not angry that she was frightened. I was angry that fear made her deserving of care, while exhaustion made me useful. The only person who questioned the arrangement was Dr. Alcide and Frust. Ellis, a family friend who worked in emergency medicine and sometimes visited our house. He found me studying in the garage one evening because Melissa had friends in the living room and my parents said she needed the space. He did not praise me for being resourceful. He asked why I was working 3 jobs when my parents had saved for college. I told him the money was gone. He looked toward the house but did not press me for details. A week later, he gave me a small metal medical flashlight from his residency days. People panic in darkness. He said, "Your job is to help them see." I clipped it inside my bag and carried it through every stage of training that followed. Melissa noticed it once and asked why I carried something that made me look like hospital staff. Even then, she understood the value of reducing me to a supporting role. After the accident disappeared from public view, she began telling relatives that I had chosen a difficult path because I enjoyed feeling superior. She described my jobs as proof that I rejected help. She said I rarely came home because medicine had made me cold. My parents did not correct her. Her version allowed them to believe the sacrifice had been mutual rather than imposed. Years later, they would repeat that I had always preferred independence. The truth was simpler. My family did not believe Melissa deserved more than I did. They believed I could survive with less. And that belief became the excuse for every unequal choice that followed. Medical school taught me that crisis has no interest in family roles. A patient does not survive because someone was favored at home. A diagnosis does not become less urgent because the person making it is charming. In the emergency department, the only things that mattered were what had happened, what was changing, and what needed to be done next. That clarity felt almost peaceful. I entered training with scholarships, loans, and more work experience than most of my classmates. I also entered tired. There were weeks when I studied until dawn, slept for 3 hours, then reported for clinical rounds pretending my body had not noticed the difference. Dr. Ellis called every few weeks. He never asked whether I was still committed. He asked whether I was learning to rest before exhaustion made decisions for me. I carried the small metal flashlight he had given me in the breast pocket of every white coat. The casing grew scratched, but the beam remained sharp. During my first emergency medicine rotation, a man arrived after falling from a warehouse roof. He was awake, speaking clearly, and insisting he had only injured his shoulder. The waiting room was crowded, and a senior resident initially classified him as stable. Something about the way he held his abdomen bothered me. I noticed a faint change in his breathing and the gray tone beneath his skin. I asked for another blood pressure reading. It had dropped. Imaging revealed internal bleeding. He was in surgery within minutes. Later, Dr. Ellis told me I had done well. But he did not praise instinct. He praised attention. People call it intuition when they do not see the work underneath. He said, "I remembered that. I also remembered the case I nearly missed. During residency, a teenage girl arrived after a minor car accident. She was calm. Her vital signs were normal. And her mother kept insisting the crash had not been serious. I accepted the first explanation too quickly. A nurse noticed the girl becoming unusually quiet and asked me to reassess her. A second examination revealed abdominal tenderness. She had a splenic injury that could have worsened if we had discharged her. The patient recovered, but the mistake changed me. I had allowed composure to influence urgency because I recognized it. I had spent years being labeled strong enough to need less. And for a few dangerous minutes, I had almost made the same assumption about someone else. I reported the error during review, even though no one required me to. Shame protects mistakes. Honesty gives them somewhere to go. From then on, I became more careful whenever a patient appeared easy to overlook. Emergency medicine suited me because chaos stripped away performance. Titles, wealth, beauty, and family reputation lost their power under fluorescent lights. A governor and a grocery clerk received the same first question, "Where does it hurt?" I completed additional training in trauma care and disaster response. I learned to coordinate ambulances, surgical teams, blood supplies, and evacuation routes during events where every second created consequences. Over time, younger physicians began calling me when a scene felt too large to organize. I did not always have the answer immediately. What I had was the ability to slow panic long enough for the answer to become visible. Dr. Ellis once told me that was leadership. I thought of it as staying useful without becoming consumed. My family saw only fragments of that life. My mother knew I worked long hospital shifts. My father knew I had completed medical school, but continued introducing me as someone in healthcare. Melissa knew far more. She followed local news closely because her charity work depended on public attention. She saw the article announcing my appointment as Director of Emergency Response. She saw photographs of me leading a mass casualty drill with police, firefighters, and air medical crews. She even sent one article to our mother with the comment, "Rachel always makes these hospital roles sound dramatic." At family gatherings, she continued calling me a nurse. Sometimes she said it jokingly. Sometimes she used phrases like still doing shift work or helping the real doctors. I corrected her once. She smiled and said everyone knew what she meant. After that, I stopped correcting her. The truth did not become weaker because my family refused to use the right words. Years later, the clearest proof arrived from Melissa herself. A foundation assistant accidentally copied me on an email chain discussing potential donors. Attached was a press packet containing my hospital biography, credentials, and a photograph from a disaster response conference. Melissa had approved the document. Beneath my name, she had written, "Useful connection, but keep her role vague around family donors." I read the sentence twice, then saved the email. She had never misunderstood my career. She had managed it. Calling me just a nurse was not ignorance. It was the language she used to protect the only family story in which she remained above me. By the time I became Director of Emergency Response at St. Restes, Matthews, I had stopped expecting my family to understand what the title meant. The role did not come with a private office large enough to impress Melissa or a schedule that looked important from the outside. Most days, it meant standing in windowless command rooms, coordinating ambulances, operating rooms, blood banks, air transport, and public safety teams while everyone else waited for someone to decide what mattered first. I liked the work because emergencies stripped away the language people used to protect status. A donor, a senator, a teacher, and a man sleeping beneath a highway overpass all entered the same system through the same doors. Their names could affect the news coverage later. They did not affect triage. I made that rule explicit when I took the position. No one moved ahead because of influence. No staff member altered documentation to protect a reputation. If a junior nurse saw something a senior physician missed, the nurse spoke and the physician listened. If an error occurred, we examined the error before examining who might be embarrassed by it. I had grown up in a family where truth was adjusted to preserve one person's comfort. I had no interest in building the same structure inside a hospital. Leadership did not make me infallible. In my second year as director, a regional train derailment sent more than 30 patients to 3 hospitals within 40 minutes. I focused so heavily on operating room capacity that I underestimated how quickly our blood supply would fall. A laboratory supervisor interrupted the command call and told me our projections were wrong. For 1 second, pride tempted me to defend the plan. Then I looked at the numbers and saw she was right. We changed distribution. contacted neighboring counties, and avoided a shortage. Afterward, I reviewed the decision publicly and credited her by name. Melissa would have seen that as weakness. I understood it as the difference between authority and vanity. The work made me known in circles. My family never entered. Fire chiefs called when evacuation plans failed. Hospital administrators asked me to review emergency systems. State officials invited me to disaster preparedness meetings where my name appeared on briefing folders rather than dinner place cards. I did not tell my parents about most of it. My mother still asked whether I worked nights. My father referred to my department as the emergency room, as though years of training had left me standing behind a reception desk. Melissa knew better. Her foundation organized health events, and public credibility mattered to her. She followed hospital news, donor announcements, and state appointments carefully. She knew exactly which title I held because she had used it when it benefited her and erased it when it threatened her. The governor's accident happened 11 months before the family dinner. His motorcade was traveling through heavy rain when a delivery truck crossed the center line. The lead vehicle spun into a barrier, and the governor's car struck it at an angle before being hit from behind. By the time the first ambulance report reached us, there were multiple injured passengers, one trapped driver, and conflicting information about whether the governor was conscious. I activated the trauma response before anyone confirmed his identity. When he arrived, he was pale, struggling to breathe, and insisting that the security officer beside him be treated first. His blood pressure was falling. One side of his chest was not moving normally. I recognized the pattern, ordered immediate decompression, and pushed for surgical imaging, despite pressure from his staff to slow down and wait for a specialist. The scan showed internal bleeding and a liver injury. We moved him to surgery before his office had finished notifying the press. He survived because dozens of people acted correctly: paramedics, nurses, blood bank staff, respiratory therapists, surgeons, and transport teams. I had led the response, but I had never considered the outcome mine alone. When the governor's office later offered to hold a public recognition ceremony, I declined. Saving him had not been a favor. It had been the job. I also knew publicity would turn a medical event into political theater, and I had no interest in standing beneath a banner while people praised the part of the system they could place in a photograph. That choice kept the story mostly outside my family. Melissa saw the articles that mentioned my name. But because there was no ceremony and no television interview, entirely an everydayden, she treated the achievement as something she could still reduce. At the dinner, after Governor Holloway thanked me, she recovered quickly enough to say, "Rachel never tells us anything." I answered, "No one asked." My mother looked embarrassed. My father looked confused. Melissa looked calculating. Before I left, she asked whether the governor still took my calls. I told her former patients were not personal connections. She smiled as if the question had been casual. It was not. By the end of that evening, my family finally understood why the governor knew my name. The next morning, Melissa would ask me to make sure he forgot hers. The first call came from my mother at 7:12 the next morning. I let it ring because I was in the middle of a command briefing about a chemical spill on the east side of the city. The second call came from my father. The third came from Melissa. By the time the meeting ended, there were 9 missed calls, 2 voicemails, and 1 message marked urgent: "Call before you speak to anyone from the state." Melissa had written. That sentence told me more than the voicemails did. I returned my mother's call from my office. She answered immediately and began with the language families use when they want wrongdoing to sound administrative. "There has been some confusion with the foundation accounts," she said. Then she explained that state auditors had requested documents from the Monroe Health Foundation. Several expenses had been flagged. A former employee had raised concerns. One donor was threatening to withdraw support until the review was complete. "It is probably bookkeeping," my mother said. "Melissa has never been good with paperwork." I looked through the glass wall of my office at the emergency coordination board, where every decision was time-stamped and every resource had to be accounted for. Poor paperwork could cause damage. It could also become a convenient name for choices someone did not want examined. "Why are you calling me?" I asked. My mother hesitated. "Your father thought you might know how these things work. I coordinate medical emergencies. I do not manage charity audits." "No. But you know the governor." There it was. Less than 12 hours after Melissa had called me just a nurse, my family had found a new title for me: access. I asked to speak with Melissa. She came on the line sounding irritated rather than frightened. She said the state review was routine and had probably been triggered by a political opponent of one of the foundation's board members. She said the governor's office could make a call, clarify that the foundation was legitimate, and prevent unnecessary damage to its reputation. "You saved his life," she said. "He owes you." I leaned back in my chair. "He received medical care. That does not create a debt." Melissa exhaled sharply. "Do not make this about ethics. It is one phone call." I asked what the auditors had found. She repeated that it was nothing serious, then listed the details only after I remained silent. Travel expenses had been charged to the foundation during a weekend retreat. A vehicle lease appeared under an outreach program that had never operated. Several payments had gone to a consulting company owned by her boyfriend. Donor funds intended for community clinics had covered a private event at a resort. Each item arrived with an explanation. The retreat included planning. The vehicle transported guests. The consulting fees reflected strategic work. The resort event had raised awareness. The words were polished. But the pattern was not. "Send me the audit request," I said. "Why?" "Because you are asking me to contact a public official. I want to see what you are asking me to interfere with." She did not like that phrasing. "I am asking you to prevent a misunderstanding." The documents arrived an hour later. I reviewed them between calls. The state had requested bank statements, vendor records, board approvals, and promotional materials. One attachment stopped me. It was a donor brochure bearing my photograph, hospital title, and a quotation I had never given. Beneath my name, I was listed as honorary medical advisor to the foundation. I searched the remaining files. My name appeared on grant applications, sponsorship letters, and 2 event proposals. One document included an electronic signature placed beneath a statement confirming that I had reviewed the foundation's community health programs. I had never attended a board meeting. I had never approved a program. I had never allowed Melissa to use my title. I called her again. "Why is my name on these documents?" She answered too quickly. "You support community medicine. That is not consent." "You are my sister. That is not consent either." She said everyone in the family understood that I would help if the foundation needed credibility. The word credibility remained in the air between us. For years, Melissa had minimized my work in public. In private, she had been using it to attract money. I asked who authorized the electronic signature. She said an assistant probably handled it. I asked for the assistant's name. She changed the subject. Then my father joined the call and told me not to overreact. He said the foundation had done good work and one technical error should not destroy Melissa's reputation. My mother added that the governor could resolve everything quietly. I looked again at the signature beneath my name. They were not asking me to clarify a misunderstanding. They were asking me to help contain a lie built partly from my identity. Before ending the call, Melissa said, "You know what this investigation could do to me?" I answered, "I know what your documents already did to me." For years, she had reduced my career whenever an audience was present. Behind closed doors, She had been borrowing every ounce of authority she pretended I did not have. The meeting took place 2 days later in a conference room at the Foundation's law firm. Melissa sat at the head of the table, even though the attorney had placed her name card 3 seats down. My parents sat beside her. Across from them were the Foundation's counsel, an accountant, and a board representative who had stopped making eye contact with anyone. I arrived alone with copies of the documents bearing my name and the email chain Melissa had forgotten I still possessed. The room smelled of coffee, printer toner, and the kind of expensive wood polish meant to make difficult conversations feel controlled. Melissa began before the attorney could speak. "This has gone too far," she said. "One clarification from you could end it." I placed the donor brochure on the table. "This says I reviewed your medical programs. You support public health. That is not what the document says." She leaned back, visibly irritated by the distinction. My father stepped in with the tone he used whenever he wanted disagreement to sound childish. He said no one had intended harm. My mother said families sometimes acted on one another's behalf without formal permission. The Foundation lawyer remained silent. He had already read the materials. He knew intent was no longer the only problem. I opened the grant application containing my electronic signature and turned it toward Melissa. "Who placed this here?" She glanced at the accountant. "Someone in administration." "Who I do not remember." "Then give me the access logs." Her expression changed. Until that moment, she had assumed I had come to negotiate the size of the favor. She had not considered that I might ask for evidence. The accountant cleared his throat and said the signature had been added from Melissa's office account. She turned toward him sharply. "That does not mean I did it. It means your office did," I said. My mother reached for my wrist. I moved my hand away before she touched me. "Rachel, please. We are family." The phrase had followed me through every unequal decision of my childhood. Family meant Melissa's emergency became everyone's responsibility. Family meant my loss became proof of maturity. Family meant consent could be assumed whenever asking might produce an answer they did not want. "Family is not permission," I said. Melissa laughed without humor. "You are acting like I stole your identity. You used my name, title, photograph, and signature to raise money. For a charity, for a foundation that paid your travel, your boyfriend's company, and your private events." The attorney interrupted to remind us that the review had not reached final conclusions. I agreed. I was not there to decide guilt. I was there to decide what I would do. My father leaned forward. "The governor owes you his life." "No," I said. "He received treatment from a hospital team." "One call," Melissa said. "That is all. And what should I say?" She looked at me as though the answer were obvious. Tell him the foundation was legitimate. Tell him the records were being misread. Tell him state officials were damaging a respected family. She never used the word stop. But that was what she wanted. Stop the audit. Stop the questions. Stop the consequences before they reached her name. I slid the forged authorization across the table. "My reputation is not your emergency exit." No one spoke. Melissa stared at the page, then at me. My mother began crying quietly. She admitted she had known my name was included in the brochures. Melissa had shown her drafts months earlier. "Why did you say nothing?" I asked. She wiped her face. "We thought you would not mind. You have done so well." There it was again. Success transformed into permission to take due, because I had survived losing my college fund. They believed I could survive losing control of my name. Because I had built credibility, they believed Melissa could borrow it without cost. I asked whether she had also seen the signature. My mother hesitated long enough to answer. She had. Melissa said it was only for internal processing. I looked at my father. He had known about the brochures but claimed he had never reviewed the applications. His version of ignorance had always depended on not asking the question that might obligate him to act. I told the attorney I would provide a written statement confirming that I had never served as an advisor, approved the promotional materials, or authorized any signature. I would cooperate with auditors if contacted. I would not call the governor. I would not ask hospital officials to support the foundation. I would not exaggerate Melissa's conduct, but I would not minimize it either. Melissa pushed back from the table. You want to watch me lose everything? No. I said, I want my name removed from what you built. She called that betrayal. I reminded her that betrayal begins where trust and consent once existed. Neither had been offered to me. The board representative finally spoke. He said the foundation would suspend Melissa pending the audit and remove all materials carrying my name. Her face went pale. For the first time, the family's instinct to protect her had reached a boundary it could not negotiate around. The real question was no longer whether I could save my sister. It was whether saving her would make me responsible for the lie she had built with my name. Melissa was removed from the foundation before the audit was complete. The board called it a temporary suspension. But everyone in the room understood what temporary meant when donors had already begun asking questions. Within 3 weeks, the foundation's bank accounts were restricted, 2 board members resigned, and the state opened a formal investigation into the consulting payments and unauthorized use of donor funds. I was contacted twice. Both times, I answered only what I knew. I confirmed that I had never served as a medical advisor, never approved the promotional materials, and never authorized anyone to place my signature on a grant application. I did not speculate about Melissa's motives. I did not ask the investigators to be lenient. I did not ask them to punish her more severely. Facts did not need my anger to remain true. My parents reacted as they always had when Melissa faced consequences. My mother called the investigation excessive. My father blamed the board for abandoning her too quickly. Both suggested that my public clarification had made the situation worse. I reminded them that the situation had existed before I spoke. My statement had only removed my name from it. For several weeks, they stopped calling. The silence felt familiar, but it no longer felt like rejection. It felt like space. Melissa eventually agreed to repay a portion of the money and cooperate with investigators. She resigned permanently, lost her position on 2 local boards, and was required to complete community service as part of a negotiated settlement. There was no dramatic arrest, no courtroom confession, and no moment when everyone finally admitted I had been right. Real consequences were quieter. Invitations stopped arriving. Donors no longer returned her calls. People who once praised her leadership began using careful phrases such as poor judgment and lack of oversight. Melissa discovered that reputation built from borrowed credibility could disappear as quickly as the truth reached the people funding it. We spoke once after the settlement was announced. She came to my office without an appointment and sat across from me in the chair normally used by hospital administrators. She looked tired, but not defeated. Melissa had never been someone who surrendered easily. "You enjoyed this," she said. I knew she needed to believe that. If my decision had been revenge, then she could remain the victim of my resentment instead of the author of her own choices. "No," I said. "I stopped protecting you from what you did." She looked toward the window. "You could have made one call." "Yes. And you chose not to." "I chose not to misuse a patient's gratitude." Her mouth tightened. "He is the governor. He was my patient." That distinction had always been the point. She said I had watched her fall. I answered calmly. "I did not push you. I stopped holding the ladder." For the first time, she had no immediate response. Her eyes moved to the small metal flashlight lying beside my keyboard. The casing was scratched from years of use, and the clip had been repaired twice. She asked whether I still carried it. I told her I did. "Doctor, Ellis had given it to me when I was 18. Before medical school. Before titles. Before the governor knew my name. It reminded me that darkness did not require drama. It required enough light to see what was actually there. Melissa stood to leave. At the door, she said, "I really did think you would be fine." It was the closest she had ever come to acknowledging the family arrangement we had grown up inside. I said, "That never made it fair." She nodded once and left. We did not reconcile. We also did not become enemies. Our relationship settled into something limited and honest. We spoke rarely. When we did, I ended conversations that turned my boundaries into cruelty or her consequences into my responsibility. My parents adjusted more slowly. My mother eventually admitted she had confused my reliability with permission to ask less of me. My father never apologized directly, but he stopped defending the use of my name. Sometimes, change arrives without the language people should have used years earlier. It still counts as change. Months later, I replaced the battery in Dr. Panis, Ellis's flashlight before an overnight trauma shift. The beam came on immediately. Narrow and steady. I clipped it inside my coat and walked toward the emergency department as an ambulance radioed ahead with 3 injured passengers. Recognition from powerful people had never made me worthy. Governor Holloway's gratitude had only made my family's denial harder to maintain. My sister asked whether I was still just a nurse because she believed a title could make one person smaller and another person safe. She was wrong. The governor's gratitude did not give me value. It only forced the room to see what Melissa had spent years trying to hide. What I learned from the foundation audit is that credibility is not a family resource. A name earned through years of work cannot be borrowed like a serving dish or passed around because someone needs a cleaner story. When a charity uses a doctor's title, a donor's trust, or a patient's gratitude, it is not using decoration. It is using public confidence, and public confidence belongs to the people the institution promised to serve. That is why consent matters, even between relatives, especially between relatives. A signature is not a formality. A photograph is not harmless. A title is not an ornament for someone else's brochure. If a cause is honest, it can survive honest paperwork. If it needs a borrowed name, a hidden payment, or one quiet phone call to remain standing, then the problem is not the audit. The problem is what the audit finally found. Scriptwriter Nguyen Van Chien.